Is it Art Shull? Is that what I heard your name was? I'll change your name on the screen so you show
Yeah.
up.
Okay. Yeah. Art or Arthur, either one.
So should I let people in?
Yep, and we're live, so you can start letting them in. And
Why they're putting everything we got with holiday content. Made up of holiday scholars.
Really help you. I am really old.
This is the head of Iowa.
We might get on.
Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started here in a little bit. For those of you who are waiting, we're working on letting a few more people into the room before we get started, so just hold on patiently. We appreciate you joining us this evening. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome this evening to our live chat on managing stress on the dairy. As we begin the new year, we are seeing levels of anxiety, stress, and depression mounting in agriculture. Stress is a common part of the life of a dairy farmer, their families, and their employees. However, the last year has caused mental anxiety to be at all-time highs. We are hoping tonight's discussion will help normalize the conversation around mental health for those in the dairy industry. If you are joining us on Zoom tonight, welcome. We do have your microphones off to eliminate background noise. If you do have a question at any point, please feel free to type it in the chat box. We're also opening the call at the end for questions if we have time. If you are following our live stream on Facebook and YouTube, please know this is the first time that we've done this, so we're new at it, but thank you for joining. We can still take your questions, just type them as a comment into the live stream, and we'll be able to see it and address it at some point during the evening. I'm Jane Seabright with the Center for Dairy Excellence, and I'm pleased tonight to have two farmers, Art Shull and Randy Roecker, who are willing to share their stories around mental health and wellness. After they share their stories, Dr. Michael Rosmann will share why stress is a common side effect of farming and how those involved in dairying and in any facet of the agriculture industry can manage stress more effectively. Dr. Rosmann is well known for his research and guidance in behavioral health in the agriculture community. He is speaking tonight from his home state in Iowa. Welcome to this evening's panelists. First to share his story tonight is Art Shull. Art is a farmer from Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Art, welcome. Why don't you start by sharing your personal story related to stress and farming?
Okay. As Jane said, my name is Art Shull. I'm from Bucks County, and we farm about 500 acres, and we have about 220 milk cows and about 220 heifers and young stock too. And Charlie asked me to talk about stress, and I'm not 100% sure why he asked me, but I guess he thought I was under a lot of it. So we all know the last 5-6 years and more have been very stressful for every dairy farmer. I think it's just been a trying time to try and keep a farm running. In May, I thought I had pulled a muscle in my thigh, and I went to a doctor and they looked at it and they told me I needed a new hip. Well, in May, I told the guy, I said, that's not a very good time for me to have a hip replacement. And they said, well, we can give you some steroids and you'll feel wonderful. So that's what they did. And that didn't do anything either. So the next thing they had to do was some more testing, they said. So I had a CAT scan and that showed I had some cancer on a lesion in my iliac bone, which is near your hip. And that had to be taken care of first. So next I had to have a biopsy on that. And it did prove to be cancerous. Through all this, I was still trying to do my regular work, plant corn, harvest, haylage, and all in extreme pain. So I guess that was causing some stress. And I had to start using a cane for all that time because I could barely walk without one. So the whole summer continued to be very busy. I had more testing done and more biopsies. And finally they said I needed to have 25 doses of radiation on this hip or this lesion before I could even go back to see the surgeon about the hip, which also continued to be very painful. So Charlie asked me to talk about stress, but I think in the moment, I just felt I needed to keep going and didn't really see many options. So I don't think I really dealt with it as stress. I just dealt with it as just how to keep going forward. So my wife and I had plenty of heated discussions by this time about how I was going to just keep working until I died. It was a pretty rough time for us, I guess. She felt I had to do something to make a change, and I just didn't even know how to make a change in the midst of a busy summertime and in the middle of a busy year. It seemed like it was a busier summer than usual. And then we went from cutting our last cutting of haylage and right into corn silage. And that's about the time I started 25 treatments of radiation, also 5 times a week. By this time, I had a few people that were suggesting to me that I should hire someone to harvest our corn silage. And at the time, that just seemed like it was such a costly thing to do. We had never done that before. And so I really didn't think much about that. We harvest about 300 acres of corn. And so we started doing that. And one night after everybody had left, I was greasing this chopper, our harvester, for the next day. And all of a sudden I slipped off of it on the corn head. And as I started to slip, I tried to turn so I would face forward instead of backward. And my head just smacked into a pipe that was part of the corn head. And I truly thought I had cracked my head open. And what my wife had said in her conversation, I thought was really going to be true, that I would die. I'm sorry, but it's got a little emotion. So what a terrible thought that what my wife said would maybe come true. Fortunately, I wasn't dead, but I had blood everywhere. So finally able to get myself up and get all the blood cleaned up and get home. And we went to the hospital. And I had a broken nose. I did not have a concussion. And I ended up with 2 black eyes. And but it was a real wake-up call that things were just so stressful that I hardly gave myself a chance to relax. Just trying to get one. And well, at that point, I decided, well, I guess maybe I do need to hire someone to finish this corn. So we had about 100 acres done, and I hired somebody to do the other 200, which was a very good, great idea. By then, I was also starting to feel some of the effects of this radiation, and I would become so tired that I would just have to conk out for 2 or 3 hours a day. And I also didn't feel good enough. I didn't have good enough help that I could just not be there to give direction and do what I could to help out. We finally got through the fall and the radiation, and I was told by mid-November that I could go back to see the surgeon, who said they could operate by the middle of December on my hip. So that was great, but it also just made me make a big push to get things done before this operation. So it just still kept me very busy on a cane the whole time, and people telling me, and through all this, the last 4 or 5 years, my parents, we've had home health care at home, 24-hour care at the farm. My father's 94. My mother died this February. She was 92. So those people would tell me, you know, this is just way too much what you're trying to accomplish here with the help you have. So I was feeling people from all directions telling me, you know, you need to do something. And but it was just such a busy time. We are a family farm. I'm the 4th generation. I farm with my brother, and we have 3 employees. So the decision to get out is and was a very emotional decision, along with an economic one and a health. I had health issues. The thought of being the generation that stops farming carries its own stress when you have a family farm that's been in the family for a long time. So I was looking into different possibilities, and in December, DFA, Dairy Farmers of America, they came along with a ruling that they had created a base in March when the pandemic struck and milk was in oversupply. They put everybody on a base, and through the whole time period, that base had been moved. You could sell your base; it was being moved all along the up and down the East Coast. Well, they came along with a ruling that you wouldn't be able to do that anymore. As of January 1st, the base had to stay with your farm, which for our farm where we live, the chances of having somebody come and take your farm over are about nil. Like if you lived in Lancaster County, that would be a pretty easy thing to have some young person want to come and rent your farm and continue keeping an operation going. But where we live, it's very slim. So, and also that DFA decision, it increased the value of your cows to a number that about doubled what they would normally be worth. So it kind of put us in a position where it was, if there was a time to do something, we had a small window of opportunity to do that. So I talked that over with my brother, and he was kind of in agreement. And so we decided to sell the cows to capture this opportunity in the small window of time we had. So the head decision was a lot easier than the heart decision for that, because as I said earlier, family farm, fourth generation, being the one to end it is just something that's, I think, hard on people, that anybody would be in that position. So about a week before I had this surgery, I did start working at home to catch up on all the bills and try and get everything settled before the operation, knowing that, not knowing what the recovery would be like. So I wanted to have all that taken care of. About that time, I just started to become teary and cry. It hardly took anything to make me cry, a memory, anything. And I had never cried much in my whole life. I think my whole life I had just kept going. Probably that was the way I dealt with stress. Really didn't deal with it. Having to slow down and going into this operation after 7 months of such pain, I guess all of a sudden this stuffed stress just came out in uncontrolled tears. So as of this meeting, we have sold all of our dairy cows. We still have some dry cows and heifers that need to go yet. They were part of the whole plan. But we will continue to raise. We have about 200 heifers from young day old to 2-year-old to raise. We have a lot of feed left over from last year. I've had my hip replaced, and I'm starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel for that. But we still have many unanswered questions about the direction of our farm and the ground, how we're going to use it going forward. And I'm still not sure why Charlie asked me to talk about this, because looking back, I probably didn't deal with stress very well. I just kind of kept going. And I still get very teary very easily, and I don't know when and if that's going to change. Also, I actually probably did about 20 years ago. My wife was after me to start taking an antidepressant because she could see how this lifestyle just had me wound up all the time. And so I did take an antidepressant, a low dose, and later, maybe 10 years later, they actually doubled it. I don't think I saw the difference, but my wife saw the difference that it did for me. At the time, I didn't think I wanted to take it, or I didn't think I'd take it very long. But fast forward 20 years, I've pretty much been on it all along. And I think it has helped me in that I'm just able to put up with a lot of disappointments when things don't or can't go right, don't get the way I would like to have them done. I don't think, I think I'm able to react without overreacting about things like that. And it makes me a little more flexible to work with what I have. So I think it was a good thing, even though I never thought I'd keep taking it. But later I just thought, well, I'm just going to just take it. I could hardly remember I take it now. I never really had any side effects from it. So looking back, that was probably a good thing. It helped me deal with a lot, really. And it just, I think, did kind of take the edge off. And I guess that's about all I have to say for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Art. Thank you very much for sharing that story. I think a lot of people could definitely relate. Our next, we are going to hold off for any questions that others might have for Art until at the end of this session. So please write them down or try to keep them top of mind to ask later this evening. Our next farmer to share his story is Randy Roecker. He's a dairy farmer from Loganville, Wisconsin. Unfortunately, Randy wasn't able to join us for the evening's call, so we pre-recorded his message to share with you. We're going to go ahead and share his message now. He had a lot of really good things to share as well.
knows? Who knows?
Hey, it looks like we're having trouble hearing Randy. Emily, are you sure?
Yeah, I'm working on getting the sound. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Okay, here we go.
Sorry
I'm
about
so
that,
glad to
folks.
be here with you. I'm just going to share a little bit about my story and what we've been doing in our local community here to help farmers going through depression. My name is Randy Roecker, and we have a dairy farm in Loganville, Wisconsin. Roecker's Rolling Acres is the name of our farm. And we milk about 300 cows and 750 acres. My parents are in their early 80s, and they're still with us too, helping every day. And the farm is joined also by my daughter and her husband. And so we have a typical, Wisconsin family dairy farm here. And it keeps us all busy, that's for sure. And we had a 50 cow herd, years ago, and then we decided to modernize, and we slowly were working our numbers up. And in 2006, we built our new operation. Well, unfortunately, then in 2008 is when the worldwide recession hit, and we had problems with the banking industry like everybody else. And we really had a lot of problems, and we didn't know what to do. And I was never one to suffer through depression, but that hit me very hard, and we didn't know where to turn. And it just seems people out here, like I said, you don't know where to turn and you don't know what to do. And so it was really something. So I struggled for years with that. And we seeked out, tried to do treatment and, go to the different doctors and things like that. So it was quite involved. But then in 2008, one of my local farmer neighbors here, he took his own life. And so what happened is that took me back to where I was, 10 years ago. Or it was in 2018, I guess, is when he did. So that took me back in time to where I was. First of all, when I started to suffer from depression, I had the typical, you were shutting everything down. I didn't like shower and wash my hair, and you just leave yourself go. I didn't eat. I lost a lot of weight. Then I started to get physically sick all the time because I didn't want to be even around people. And I'm pretty kind of an outgoing guy anyway, but when this happens, you just want to shut yourself down. And I really lost a lot of weight, and I just left myself go, and I started to get physically sick. And then we tried to reach out to the local medical doctors. Well, they didn't really know. They kind of deal with your body, but not really with your mind as much. And that's what the problem was. We could not find a specialist that would help me, deal with my mind problem that I was having. And so I'm about an hour from Madison. So we went down there and we got some specialists. And when it was all said and done, I think I seen like eight psychiatrists and 7 therapists, because I was such a, we just didn't know where to go to get any help. And it was really bad. So that's kind of the biggest drawback that we have out here in rural America, is finding, you have the healthcare for your body, but it's the mind that we're having problems with. And I always say, if I could go back in my life, I think I would like to be like a therapist that would help out farmers, specifically agriculture, because our business is so unique that you've got to have somebody that understands this. And that's what the problem is we have out here right now, is the inadequate, mental health care in this area. I don't think, like in my own personal situation, that I wasn't seeking out help myself, because I was so far gone that I couldn't even function. So it was my family. I think the families are the ones that are going to have to seek out the help for people, because like I said, in my own situation, I was just so far gone that I couldn't function. So my family was trying to help me out. And that's the biggest thing, is try to find the right help. And it's hard. It really is out here. And I struggled with that a long time. When this happened to my farmer neighbor, that he took his own life, that took me back where I was 10 years ago. And his struggle was exactly like mine. I mean, it was so bad that, I don't really like to talk about it, but this is what we're doing today. I'm sharing my story. But I was on over 20 different medications, and I had ECT, which is the brain shocking treatment. I had that done also 9 times. And, that's the purpose of me coming out here, is talking about and sharing my story. So that's what happened to me. And the gentleman that, took his own life there, my neighboring farmer, he went through the same issues. And that's what it really struck home with me. And that's why I decided to start this group in our local church. And he was also a member. And we started this group down there, and basically just to get everybody together to talk about what had happened. And because it was very, very hard for our local community. And so we did that. We got together, and the first meeting, we had like 50 people there, and we had the Wisconsin State Journal was there, and they did a story on what we were trying to do. So that was picked up by the AP network. So we had a lot of media exposure from this, and we try to have these meetings during the winter months when farmers are more available there, and we get together and we just talk about, we have speakers come in and, talking about depression and anxiety and suicide prevention and things like that. So that started off as just a small little meeting there. Now it's developed into what we call the Farmer Angel Network. So that's something we're very proud of. And we get together and we've got speakers actually from the state of Wisconsin. The Farm Crisis Center comes in. We've teamed up with our local health department, and they do like training. It's called QPR training. It stands for question, persuade, and refer. So they do a lot of training. So if farmers are depressed, they usually don't leave the farm. So what we do is we train the milk haulers, the feed nutritionists, the vets, the bankers, people like that, that they come in and they know how to talk to the farmers. So they know how to question the farmer if something's wrong. They know how to refer them to, help get help, and then persuade them not to do anything. So that's where you get the QPR training from. And so that's kind of what we're doing in the local area here, and just trying to get together was just make it okay that, you can seek out help now, like at the Farm Crisis Center, that you can actually get vouchers there for free counseling. And that helps out too, because a lot of times farmers don't have the insurance or the money to go to these therapists. So that's one thing that we're working on too. So we're very hopeful that the Farmer Angel Network is going to, help out farmers that are going through this. And I shouldn't say just farmers, because we have a lot of other people that come too. And one thing that we've also noticed is we have people coming from counties further away. We've had people drive 2 and 3 hours to come to our meetings that we had, because they're embarrassed to be at their local meetings that they have, because they don't want neighbors to see them there. So they would rather come to a different county. And so we're happy that that's happening too. And so that's what we basically want to do is, we want to get our story out there so it's okay to talk about this. And I'm still struggling. Like my parents, they're in their early 80s, and my mom, she really doesn't like it that I talk about this personal issue that I have, but I'm trying to help other people. And I figure if I put my name on this, that, Randy Roecker had these struggles, that it's okay, let's talk about this. And that's what I'm trying to do, help here in this situation, that it's okay to talk about this. And what a lot of us say in this industry is that it's okay to not be okay, which is true, because, we're all suffering with this and want to be able to talk about the situation.
So unfortunately, he's not here to say thank you, but I thought his message was as meaningful as Art's. Both of you, Art and Randy, really did an excellent job in spotlighting some of the challenges that I think many, many farmers face. Now that we've heard from both the farmers, I am going to turn the program over to Dr. Rosmann. Mike, I am going to go ahead and share your PowerPoint if you want to get ready to share your message. Just to remind everyone, or to highlight, Dr. Rosmann did say he was willing to take questions during his presentation. So instead of holding them all to the end, if you do have a question, just post it in the comment box on the live stream or in the chat box on the Zoom connection, and I'll make sure that he can see it and he hears it as he goes along. So welcome, Dr. Rosmann. We're glad to have you with us.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. And thank you, Art and Randy, for telling your stories. I commend you for being so courageous and sharing these very difficult and tender times. It is heartening to see that you have been dealing with difficulties in a fashion that has enabled you to go on. You are responding in a normal way to an abnormal situation. The next slide shows my contact information, and I put this up there in case anyone wishes to contact me. I prefer email, of course, because I'm able to usually respond to that when I'm available. Just so you know, I am a 74-year-old Western Iowa farmer who lives on a family farm. Prior to moving to the farm, I was a professor at the University of Virginia in the psychology department. We raised our children on a farm. We had an organic farm operation and had approximately 180 cattle, registered Simmental cattle, until I just couldn't do it all anymore, having a full-time practice of psychology as well as farming full-time. And I had my health issues just like Randy and you had, Art. They're very common. I think, and if we'll go to the next slide, I want to highlight that you can take these slides and use them. They're posted online, according to Jane and Emily. And there are a number of readings that I think supplement some of the things the points that I want to make, but I also think they can be used by you and others if you wish. So feel free to do that. There is, as we know, some good and bad news with agriculture. We're seeing an upturn in certain parts of agriculture, mostly the grains, but we haven't seen much improvement in the volatile dairy prices. There are so many uncertainties right now with what's happening in our government and with trade policies, and add on COVID-19, and oh my goodness. The bankruptcy rate has risen for the past 3 years. It's highest in Wisconsin. It's went down just a little in from 2019 in July 1 through June 30, 2020. But the bad news has also, if you go to the next slide, you'll see that there is some really good news about farming, which I think Art, you highlight, and Randy also. One of the things that we're seeing this time is that in comparison to the 1980s farm crisis, we're not seeing as many suicides or as many bankruptcies. We do have a more collegial environment with lenders now than we had back then. Bankruptcy laws have been changed. We've learned a lot from the farm crisis of the 1980s and since then. Some of the work has been done in 7 upper Midwestern states that include the Wisconsin Farm Center that Randy mentioned. The 7 states are, besides Wisconsin, Minnesota, North and South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, and Iowa. Our work started in 1998 and continues to this day, although we no longer have funding, but the work that we did has led to the creation of a farm and ranch stress assistance network that is an attempt by Congress and by USDA to develop agricultural counselors who understand behavioral health as well as farming. And that's unique because we have a new field coming into play called agricultural behavioral health, which tries to blend the knowledge that we are gaining about behavior with the stresses and benefits of farming. So we're going to see in agriculture training courses much more emphasis on managing our behavioral health. That's why it's so good to see this particular webinar today, and I thank Jane and Emily and the Center for Dairy Excellence. If you go to the next slide, it's more good news, and Art and Randy both indicate a point I want to make, and that is farm people are much more open than we ever have been about talking about our behavioral health. I write a column that has been published now for 9 years in some 25 or so newspapers and farm magazines around the country. It is heartening to see that some of the people in local communities cut out the column that I have written the week before, or they find articles in a dairy magazine like Dairy Herd Management or Hordes Dairyman, even Bovine Veterinarian. And they take these articles on Monday morning during the winter months when they meet for coffee. This was prior to COVID though, of course. And they would talk about what are these guys saying now? And they would open up about themselves and create kind of a network of supports, much like Randy was indicating. And Art, in your own way, you developed a network of support within your family and others outside of the family, chiefly your medical providers, but you had some wonderful people to rely on at your home in Pennsylvania. Next slide. It is understandable why we cling so desperately to our land. We humans are basically the most sophisticated animals around. We have been called humans for about 6 million years, but modern humans only for about the past 200,000 years or less, actually. We all came from Africa, but when we were in Africa, humans, like animals, worked very hard to acquire the territories needed to sustain their families and to reproduce their own species. We see this territorial squabbling behavior still go on among animals. Cows have a pecking order at the feed bunk, and the chief cow always gets there first and pushes the others away. We see it in the way coyotes call morning and evening around here in Iowa. They mark their territories by leaving scat or urine and by yipping every morning and evening. We humans mark our territories with fences, with legal descriptions. We have become much more sophisticated. But why do we cling so desperately to the land? It is because we are doing something that is a noble occupation. We are supplying food. Many other farmers supply fibers, and many of us supply renewable biofuels in the form of corn going into ethanol and soybeans into biofuels. We also, in some cases, are recycling manure or the methane. Next slide. So it's understandable why we cling to the land, but I also want to say that both Art, you and Randy, next slide on genetic predispositions. You and Randy exhibit characteristics of successful farmers. Both of you probably have all your lives pushed yourselves to the point that you could hardly bear to keep going. You pushed yourself to the extreme. You didn't need as much sleep. Probably you have a little bit of what we call attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. We find that the rate of ADHD in successful farmers is 4 times higher than it is in unsuccessful farmers and the general population. So there is an upside to this ADHD thing that we're hearing so much about. And it is that it inclines us to not need as much sleep, to be more attentive to opportunities, to sometimes take risks, even though it might not be wise. But our ancestors certainly took risk, and they carried that genetic tendency to work terribly hard and to not need a whole lot of rest and to try to overcome everything through that inherited agrarian imperative. Next slide. There is another tendency that I want to bring to your attention. I should have said this on the last slide, Jane. I'm sorry if you go back to it. Another characteristic that we find in successful farmers is that we have a tendency to react very strongly to any threat. Art, in your case, you reacted to the threat of health eroding your life by trying to gut your way through it. When that wasn't possible, you sought assistance from medical providers, but you were exhibiting this tendency that successful farmers have of reacting very strongly by working extra hard and attacking the threats as best you knew how. So did Randy. So do successful farmers everywhere. These are some of the findings that came out of our longitudinal research from 1998 up to the present day. One thing that we do now see, though, is that we are beginning to understand behavior better. Next slide. We never thought of behavior as something that we could manage. We always thought of needing mental health treatment as something that required that we go to others who could give us medications, or counselors who could help us work through problems and even see in our historical past what might have contributed to our management of stress and why we developed anxiety and depression or other problems. But psychology, being the science of behavior, we're not as far along as the medical sciences of biology and chemistry and genetics. But even though we're now where these fields were about 100 years ago, we have learned that we can observe behavior carefully. We can count behaviors, we can quantify it. We can also figure out the antecedents and what follows specific behaviors. That is part of the revolution that is occurring to make the behavioral well-being of farm people more understandable. I want to just fairly briefly mention the studies by Kohlstrup and Holtgren that are listed here, and they're in one of the articles that I sent over for posting too. These two Swedish psychologists followed dairy farmers in Sweden and Norway. They also followed the behavioral health or the mental health of workers in the dairy and the behavioral well-being of workers who cared for cattle in feedlots. So they assessed the mental well-being on a scale where they asked the farm managers, owners, and the workers all to rate themselves in terms of the degree of mental stress they were exhibiting. What they found is that distressed farmers had more veterinary visits to their farming operation. They had higher somatic cell counts in their milk. It became interesting, or it kind of pointed out that we have to do something to deal with the stress. Some of the stressed farm people began having weekly meetings between the workers and the managers, sharing their concerns, but also sharing strategies and recommendations for making the operation function better. This helped. If they sought treatment elsewhere through counseling with psychologists, behavioral health therapist, or medications, they also seemed to get better. So building a network of support that included professional caregivers along with the people who are involved in the farming operation, that improved their mental well-being to the point that somatic cell counts went down in their dairy herd milk. It also, the number of veterinary visits declined. So I want to mention this because it's important for us to know this as a way that we can make our farms, our dairy operations optimally productive, if only the prices would improve too. Let's go to the next slide. If there are any questions that come along, I'm happy to take them, or Art, and we can, if I can ask you to also be available if a question is something that you can help address.
So far, we haven't gotten any questions,
okay.
Dr. Rosmann, but please, if
I'll
anyone has them, put them in the chat box or put them on the comment section.
Sure. Thank you. Let's look at what are the signs of stress. Our research showed that for about 2.25 years, we followed every person who called one of our farm crisis hotlines in our 7 states. We followed every person who was referred for counseling and who received a voucher, as Randy was mentioning. That is a paper that could be exchanged for a free counseling session. The counselor took the piece of paper, filled it out without any names or identifying information, and sent it back to the state program that was handling this. Ultimately, it came to Agro Wellness, my office, and we paid the counseling for we paid the counselor. We learned a great deal following some 43,000 plus callers to hotlines and over 10,000 individuals or families who received vouchers and followed up in therapy. First sign that we noticed was that farmers began to bicker more within the family and to reveal their disgust and their blame and their hurt. That is the most common symptom, and the first symptom typically in about 40% of the cases of farmers who contacted the hotlines and who were seen in counseling. So the farmers knew why they were reaching out for help, and the counselors saw exactly that diagnosis when they provided the therapy, or led the family to resolve their own issues. Because I don't look at counseling as something that you have to go to an expert for. The expert teaches us how to manage our behavior, and that's why we can learn from many, many people how to manage ourselves productively. We can get that help from coaches, from business managers, from lenders in some cases, from the extension, and from organizations like the Center for Dairy Excellence, and another good one is Dairy Girls Network. So that first most common symptom was a breakdown in family relations. Sometimes it went to the point of divorce or even physical or domestic abuse. We did see that alcohol or drug abuse occurred as the primary symptom in only 7% of the cases that went into counseling. So it was not the primary symptom of depression or of stress, but it was a secondary accompanying diagnosis in 40 to 50% of the individuals or families who were seen for in counseling and for various forms of assistance. We learned, though, that drinking heavily, or taking too many painkillers like oxycodone or methamphetamines usually were attempts to deal with the troubles that were going on in the farming operation. Maybe by drinking heavily, they didn't have to think for a while. Also, alcohol was numbing some of the pain, not just the psychological pain, but physical pain in some cases. We saw that farmers who were pushing themselves to stay awake for 2 days straight to keep the combine going, they were using methamphetamines. So it was a fairly common symptom. The next symptoms that we saw, and if we'll go to the next slide, we saw almost always anxiety occurring as the stress mounted. We saw anxiety build up because stressors accumulated to a point that we couldn't handle them anymore. We know that the worst stressor is the threatened loss of the farming operation. When it begins to incur financial threats, that often is the primary, most significant stressor that can happen to farm people. And it happens to farm people because we have these tendencies to overwork and their genetic tendencies, and it is explained by what I call the theory of the agrarian imperative. We want to do our job of taking care of people. So we find that anxiety almost always accompanies a buildup of stressors. In your case, cancer was at the top, of course, but low dairy prices contributed to the stress and helped you to force yourself to push on. When you fell onto your face, that was a third stressor. So there were low dairy prices, cancer, you add in the damage that occurred when you fell, and we shouldn't overlook the death of your mother. All of those stressors occurred within a short period of time. It's amazing you did as well as you did. Most farm people can handle 2 stressors at once, but 3 is usually pushes us to the breaking point. And here you were coping with 3 and even up to 4. Do you want to say anything about that, Art?
No, not really.
Okay. Does it feel like what I'm saying is more or less correct, or am I off base?
Well, it probably is. I just one that kept pushing. So
Yeah.
I think when Charlie asked me, I guess I probably didn't even realize it was stress. It was just life. You know?
It's life.
Yeah.
But the amount of stress that farmers experience is the highest of any occupation that we know of. So that says something about how seriously we take our work and how desperately we cling to making things go, even though sometimes our capacity is compromised, as in your case. Randy made somewhat similar kinds of discoveries. He began to see that there were difficulties clear back in 2008, when that cycle of low dairy prices resulted in a little upward tick in the suicide rate among dairy farmers. We saw that in our 7 states. And it became something that we had to address, because the suicide rate of farm people is about 40 to 60% higher than the general population. And we have the highest rate of suicide of any occupation. More suicides occur in the farm place of work than any other occupational place of work, like driving a truck or working in a school or something like that. So we needed to figure out why suicide was so frequent, or is still so frequent among farmers, and what we can do to prevent it. And that's why we're having things like this webinar. Back to Randy. He was becoming overwhelmed with chronic volatile dairy prices. He became depressed to the point that he didn't like to eat or care for himself. We'll see that these are cardinal indicators of significant depression and suicidal thinking. He started the Farmer Angel Network, which is the primary way to deal with too much stress, too much anxiety, and too much depression. Now, let me say a couple more words about why we get depressed. First, we have anxiety. When we're anxious, adrenaline keys us up. We work harder, we push ourselves, but over a matter of several days to weeks, unless there is some kind of relief, we have worn out our bodies. We have gotten to the point that we're not producing our necessary positive hormones like serotonin and norepinephrine, or oxytocin. We all know that oxytocin makes cows let their milk down. We know that cows produce serotonin when they feel good. That's why they lick each other's necks, because it's a sign, it's a way of communicating, I'm here with you. And it helps the cattle to work out relationship issues. And we'll see a little bit later here that how touching, healing touches help us as farmers. So does talking about the stresses we're feeling. But now anxiety keys us up to the point where we can't produce the serotonin, norepinephrine, oxytocin that we need. We simply crash. We become tired to the point that we can't sleep, or we sleep too much. If we sleep, it is a troubled kind of sleep. Besides that, we find that our thinking becomes pressured, and it is partly because our body is secreting cortisol. Cortisol slows us down. It also slows down the alarmed dairy cow. So cortisol has the benefit of making the animal feel a necessity to avoid the herd for a little while and to heal itself. The same thing happens with cortisol in the human body. It makes us feel logy, tired, until the next stressor emerges, like the market report or something along those lines that is negative. So the constant barrage of anxiety followed by depression, which in many cases leads to suicidal thinking, as Randy mentioned, those are factors that we need to understand, because we can control them rather than to allow the circumstances to control us. In fact, our behavior is one of the few ingredients in a farming operation over which we have control. We can control if we're having trouble with workers feeling out of sorts, not showing up, drinking on the job. We can control whether we take time to restore ourselves, whether we form a network, and so forth. While I'm getting ahead of myself, I did want to mention these because I want you to know that there is hope for how we can manage our behavior as one of the few factors that's under our control. We can't control the markets or COVID-19 or disease outbreaks or deaths or financial crises. The dairy purchaser suddenly saying, sorry, we can't pay you for your milk anymore and we're going to have to let you go. Let's go to the next slide. For farmers and ranchers, we need to understand that our rate of suicide and of depression, as I said, they're about 60% higher, which is why we need to learn how to manage the depression and to do something about it. Here you can see what occupations have the highest rates of depression and suicide. And right now, farmers are at 45 per 100,000. That is a study by the CDC. This study had been going on for a while. It was kind of cut short during the past 4 years when the CDC was told what they can and cannot do. So as more data is slowly accumulating, we are pretty sure we're going to see farmers have the highest rate of suicide and which will equal that of construction workers and miners. So I'm positive that it will occur that we have the most dangerous occupation in terms of psychological injuries as well as physical injuries like tractor rollovers and that sort of thing. If we'll go to the next slide. And again, let's remember, we'd be happy to take any questions as we go along. What to look for? Randy mentioned he got to the point where he could not think of anything that was positive. He was losing hope. He became depressed to the point that it scared him. He did things, he probably had what I would call the lump in the throat phenomena, where he wished he could cry but couldn't. Art, crying is a blessing. It gets the feelings out in the open. It is a wonderful release. But was there ever a time that before you got the kind of help that resolved some of the issues that you had this lump in your throat and wished you could cry and couldn't?
I wouldn't say so.
Okay.
No. Yeah.
I'm glad you just say that, but it is a phenomena to look for if you see your neighbor kind of having a flat affect, not showing much emotion, and like Randy, the next slide says his physical appearance declined. So go ahead, there we go. Randy couldn't bring himself to continue his regular routine activities of going to church and school activities and so forth. But he also had deterioration in his personal appearance. He was having trouble sleeping. The times when depression and suicidal thinking are most likely to occur in farmers is during tax and loan seasons. We have to have our loans worked out for the next year, usually by March 1st. We see a lot of depression around that time. We also see depression in the fall of the year when harvest is not what we were expecting. And we see anxiety followed by depression during the planting season when we're working extremely hard to get everything into the ground while also taking care of a lot of new calves getting dropped. And we just have to buckle up and do the best we can. It's too much. Let's go to the next slide. As I said, we can handle 2 stressors, but 3 or more usually push us to the brink. Sometimes these things remain tender for a while as they bring up our tears, but those tears are releases for us. What are the most stressful? As I said, it is the threatened loss of the land or the farm. The only thing that is equally as disastrous for us is the death of a child in a farming event, like a child getting caught in an auger or suffocating in a grain bin or a silo filled with gas. The death of a child is like, it changes our expectations for being able to pass along the land to the next generation. We can also have the loss of an important person in the farming operation, a father on whose advice we depend, or a brother. But when a serious threat to one of these much valued persons occurs, that can be a significant stressor, almost equal to a threatened loss of the land. It's interesting how tender we get about hanging on to all of the resources we need to farm successfully. We strive to capture or hold the soil. We strive to minimize the loss of water. We need clean water. We need clean air. But other resources that we need are sound buildings and farming equipment and dairying equipment. So whenever there is a threat to these essentials for functioning, it brings out our sense of failure, and we feel we have let down our ancestors who worked so hard to acquire the land, but we also feel that we're doing something that will make it difficult for our successors, our children, to carry on the operation. So we have to figure out ways to maintain the farming operation in a restructured fashion. Also keep in mind that other stressors are pretty serious, like divorce, but divorce isn't equal in terms of severity to the loss of an essential person in the operation, unless divorce means that one of the partners is leaving the farm operation. That then is also the loss of an essential person. Other stressors are disease outbreaks, followed by mechanical breakdowns, those kinds of things. And finally, don't rule out the possibility of exposure to toxic substances. Some of the chemicals that we use to treat pests in corn and soybeans, especially the neonicotinoid treatments on seeds, or organophosphates that we may spray on alfalfa to kill alfalfa weevil outbreaks, or some other kind of insect. Organophosphates, neonicotinoids increase the risk of depression and poor thinking. Let me illustrate with an insect. If we have seed corn that has been treated with a neonicotinoid, when the seed grows, that toxic substance spreads up through the corn plant or the sunflower or whatever it is that we're growing. Let's say it's a sunflower. I use that as a plant that is commonly produced here in the Midwest. As it travels, as the toxin travels to the flower, bees are attracted to the flower to gather the nectar and the pollen. But when they get back to the hive, that pollen that has been contaminated with the neonicotinoid has made the bee disoriented. The bee doesn't know how to communicate to its hive mates where to fly in order to find the honey, Maybe that's a good thing, since other sunflower plants will have been treated with the same substance. What happens in humans if we get exposed to these substances? If we don't wear personal protective equipment when we're applying organophosphates to kill alfalfa weevils or leafhoppers, our body tries to get rid of the substance by frequent urination, by sweating, by runny nose and eyes, by diarrhea, but we can't get rid of it fast enough because it has accumulated in our fat cells, and it stays there for a number of weeks. When we have been overexposed, we become disoriented. We can't sleep because we have become hyped up by the organophosphate. It is like taking a stimulant. It kills insects by producing too much acetylcholinesterase in the cell synapse in the honeybee. The same thing happens in the humans. We have one cell trying to communicate to another one over here. It has to send an electric signal from here to here. It has to cross a barrier that's filled with chemicals. Some of those chemicals are acetylcholine. They transmit the message from here to here. If we have too much acetylcholinesterase from the organophosphate, it builds up the it builds up the acetylcholine in our nervous system, making us disoriented, unable to think, we can't sleep. So keep that in mind. The work on this has been done by Loran Stallones at Colorado State. Some of it was done at University of Oregon, University of Washington, Iowa, and the Wisconsin Farm Center. So the research is very clear on this. We do know that when people do not handle these toxic substances correctly, that they may become overexposed and feel depressed, and it is correlated with suicidal behavior. Let's go on.
Dr. Rosmann, so we can get to some discussion at the end. Why don't you move to just managing behavior and some of the specific strategies that could help with stress?
That was where I was going to go anyhow. So next slide. And let's keep going. Okay, managing our behavior. I already said that it is something that's under our control. Just like we have to feed our dairy cows an optimal diet with sufficient carbohydrates so they have energy, they also has to have enough protein in the diet to put that protein into the milk. It has to have enough sugars in it to make fat. The diet of the dairy cow has to have all the essential trace elements: sodium, zinc, copper, and so forth. Dairy cows produce optimally when we feed them the optimal diet. When we take care of our behaviors optimally, we function best. What are those behaviors that we need to do? Let's go to the next slide. The behaviors that help us to deal with stress are talking, especially talking with people who understand our dilemmas or their dilemmas, and forming a social support network. Just like cows are social beings, we humans are social beings. We need to be able to relate our concerns to others without feeling discriminated against or somehow become the objects of scorn or accused of being weak. It's not a sign of weakness to seek help. It's a sign of strength. So building a network of support is critical. And that's why it helps so much, as they're doing in Wisconsin, to train the veterinarians in the signs and symptoms of too much stress and depression and suicidal thinking. It also helps for them to have community meetings in which people talk about their stress. For years and years, I had weekly and sometimes 2 or 3 sessions per week where farmers would come in, mostly men, but sometimes women, and they just talked about how they were managing themselves and what they could do differently. And they learned tips from each other and from the guidance of a counselor or someone like myself. At the end of this, we usually had a little treat and we said a prayer, and everybody said goodbye. And these men gave each other hugs. 30 years ago, they wouldn't have done that. But it was comfortable for these men to talk about themselves without feeling that they were being criticized. Keep in mind also that we can trigger the release of serotonin and norepinephrine in our bodies through comforting touches. What are some of these comforting touches? They are stroking hands, starting with the arm and going down to the fingers. That has the same effect as one cow licking another cow on the neck. It releases, serotonin and norepinephrine in our own bodies. So does recreation and exercise. So you probably heard of runner's high. The runner's high is by running, serotonin is released and they feel better. They tolerate more pain, and they sometimes push themselves even too hard to the point where they may injure themselves in the effort to keep producing their own serotonin. What are the ingredients in antidepressants? Well, they are norepinephrine and serotonin. You've heard of the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, the SSRIs. Those are the most common antidepressant medications. Most of the medications have one or both ingredients, that is norepinephrine or serotonin in them. And they replace what we can't produce sufficiently in our own bodies for a period of time until the stress remits. As the stress decreases, we don't need as much serotonin and norepinephrine from outside the body sources. We can get it ourselves, but we can even handle the stress by doing our own exercise, by giving these comforting touches, by taking breaks where, see, I got Art to yawn. He's getting really comfortable here. When we take a break away from the stressful environment, that helps us. We have to learn how to have vacations. One of the wonderful things that the Wisconsin Farm Center does, during the winter, they have workshops where the dairy farmers meet together at a local, maybe a series of cabins or a camp somewhere. And the kids are learning how to deal with mom and dad when they're distressed, but the parents are learning how to de-stress as they're talking with one another and with the guidance of experts or so-called experts who can help them with stress management. Meanwhile, back at home, funds are being used to pay for a neighbor or someone who the farmer trusts to operate the dairy while they are taking a short break. that has turned out to be a wonderful way of dealing with dairy farmers' stress. Other things that we can do? Well, prayer and meditation. I learned that the hard way myself. I got my toes in a combine and lost 4 of my toes on my right foot. I was overdoing it. I learned after that how to occasionally just park the combine, or to say to people, I can't take any more on. I need to take a short break. I'm going to leave a little bit early today, or next week I'm going to take off 2 days so I can restore my own functioning so I am able to help others better. Those stress breaks helped. One thing about the outdoors, which is very beneficial for us, is that sunshine helps us to produce our vitamin D, and it is more enjoyable to be in sunny weather. So we like these long summer days, but during the winter, sometimes we have to supplement that by using what we call lamps that have the same type of energy that is released by the sun, but it is produced in the light bulb. Those kinds of light bulbs can be installed into our houses or our dairies. I see a question. Can you wrap up? Yeah, we will in a few minutes. Other things we can do are interacting with pets. You all know that a dog licking us helps us to feel good. So do a bunch of kitties crawling up into our lap. Next slide. Here are some resources. I don't know what all is available in your particular area, Art, or in Pennsylvania, but I do know that you have some very good people who care about one another in the Center for Dairy Excellence, and as I said, the Dairy Girls Network. Don't be afraid of contacting these organizations or sending people to seek help and advice from them. But look also for advice from people in the extension or from dairy consultants. Look for help from farm business managers, maybe from a counselor. In New York, they have New York Farm Net. These are agricultural business experts who also have training in behavioral health. So they are professional counselors and professional farm business economics assistants. The Wisconsin Farm Center can help make these available. If you can't find a counselor in your immediate region who understands agriculture, don't be afraid of calling your state association, like the Pennsylvania State Association of Psychologists. Look it up online and call the executive director and say, I'm a farmer from central Pennsylvania, and I am looking for a professional psychologist who understands farming. You don't have to even give your name. You can just say, this is what I need, or give your first name. You can also contact Farm Aid. They're only open for 40 hours a week, but they do have some capacity to refer people to good counselors. And as a last resort, the suicide prevention hotline is available 24/7. Now, the Wisconsin Farm Center, New York Farm Net, Iowa Concern Hotline, Nebraska Rural Response Hotline, they are all 24/7 hotlines and helplines. And they are answered by people who understand agriculture, and they can help people get lined up with an appropriate counselor. But there are states that do not have such opportunities. Next slide. The 2018 Farm Bill is trying to address these particular lack of good sources of help. The Farm Bill that was signed or approved by Congress on December 30, 2018, signed by President Trump on December 31, 2018, it only completed 2 years thus far, but it's a 5-year program designed to develop local support programs. So keep this in mind, and you can approach your closest regional center. There are 4 regional centers that help local and state entities establish their own state network and providers of crisis counseling, counseling for free through vouchers, community meetings, and right now they're doing training of staff at the farm service agencies. All of this came about through the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network. It's $10 million a year for 5 years. The 4 regional centers are these. There's one at the University of Vermont. It is also operated through Farm Aid, which is in Connecticut, and the Young Farmers program in Massachusetts and Connecticut and New York. The Midwest program is located at Iowa State University. You can contact them through the Iowa Concern Hotline. So if you're in the Northeast, you can call up Farm Aid and learn about it. You can find their Northeast program through University of Vermont Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network online. If you're in the South, you contact the AgriSafe Network, A-G-R-I capital S-A-F-E. The AgriSafe Network runs that network for the southern states. And then the western states are through the Washington State University Extension. So you can contact them for funds and request their help setting up useful programs. All of this came about as a result of the work that we did from 1998 through up to the present time. The work that is being implemented around the country is based on what we found worked and what I have discussed here tonight. So I hope that I've been useful to you. You certainly have been useful to us, Art, and Randy as well. But we can take questions.
So thank you, Dr. Rosmann. I actually did have a question to get started with. If anyone else has other questions that they would like to share either through the comment or a chat box, please do so. First question I have is for you. If someone is seeing a family member is showing signs of depression who seems to be really struggling, but who will not admit to having trouble, what is the best way to approach that situation and get that person help?
It is to approach that person personally and to say, I've become concerned about you. Are you okay? Most of the time they may say that they are or not. They may even break down. Then if you don't get the kind of response that you know they should be saying, if they're saying, I'm just fine, no problems, I'm okay. Pardon me. If they say that and you know better, you can say, I'm not convinced that everything is okay. Have you noticed how you haven't been taking good care of yourself lately? Have you had anything happen to you that has given you hope lately? If they say they have had nothing to give them hope for 3 weeks or so, that is a sign that you need to find them help right away. Another thing to ask is, has anything given you pleasure? If nothing has given pleasure to a point where they haven't laughed heartily and had a good belly laugh for about a month, then that is a sign that probably they're pretty depressed, along with threats, like I wrote in that one slide, threats to harm their herd or do something outlandish. And then look for that lump in the throat thing, but also look for how the herd is being managed, or the buildings being kept up. Is the farmer keeping himself or herself well groomed? Those kinds of things. When you sense that you're not getting an accurate response, you can say, I'm enough concerned about you that I want you to go see your family doctor. I want you to do this to the point that I'm going to call you tomorrow to make sure you have made an appointment, because I'm concerned enough that we need to do something to intervene. The family doctor in most rural areas knows the signs and symptoms of depression. They also know what to look for if the farmer has been exposed to too much pesticides. There's been about 3,000 medical doctors, mostly in rural areas of our country, that have been trained in what we call agricultural medicine. I have helped to give that course, but so have a variety of other people who are experts in cardiology, in oncology, pulmonary functioning, a whole range of body systems. So don't be afraid to be pretty assertive in saying, we've got to have a plan. And if necessary, you might even call up a family member or someone who you know to express your concerns and to say, I'm here to help if you're going to need some help getting the proper kind of address of the issues that I see concerning your family member. Have I answered your question okay, Jane?
Yeah, that was a very good answer.
Thanks.
Art, I actually have a question for you. You talked about some of the things you did to address the stress that you dealt with. And then Dr. Rosmann had talked about some of the coping mechanisms or the relaxation exercises. After hearing what he talked, can you share any coping exercises or anything you try to do just to calm your mind or relieve your stress that seemed to help for you?
You're asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking you.
Well, my wife was here with me and grandkids. We had grandkids. They were probably always a big, just like you say with a dog, grandkids are just great, to help relieve stress. They've got a young look at life and all the questions that they ask and things like that. They're just good for you. So I always had access to them,
Yeah, I always think kids can make you laugh and make you happy just because they're full of life and joy, just honest joy. Question for you, Dr. Rosmann. The next one is there a particular demographic of farmers that are impacted more by stress? For instance, do men and women react differently? Is there a segment that may tend to react more deeply from it than others?
That's a good question, Jane, and the answer is yes. In terms of gender, males are much more likely to exhibit anxiety and depression first, and they are much more likely to take their own lives. In fact, suicide is 4 times more likely among male farmers than females. We don't understand everything here, but we think it has something to do with having to be strong and macho and not admit to weaknesses. That's why I'm very glad, Art, to hear what you said. You have trusted people you can go to for advice and support, not only your family, but others that you have sought assistance from about ideas. So the other thing is workers on farms have actually a higher rate of depression and suicide than the farm owners and operators, which is a little surprising, but it's true. So we need to keep our eyes out for the people who are working for us to make sure that they are well adjusted, and don't be afraid of asking them to talk with you alone and to give them some feedback and say, you know, I've noticed this and this and this. So that is another demographic. And lastly, I would say that the most stressed farmers right now are livestock farmers and dairy people. The pork and beef industries have just tanked. They're in worse shape than dairy in some ways. Even poultry producers and turkey growers are in tough shape. So somehow there is something about working with animals that makes us feel a little more vulnerable, because we don't want to have to dispose of our beloved cows. We feel that they have taken care of us for multiple years and generations, and we have taken care of them. And there's a trusting relationship there. And that's why we do see a little higher rate, I think, of depression and even self-harm among people who are involved with livestock. Interestingly, that came to light in about 2000 to 2001 in Great Britain, when they had the outbreak of bovine encephalitis, mad cow disease. Also, they had foot and mouth disease. Farmers had to surrender all of their livestock, their cattle and their sheep. They could keep their swine. The animals were shot and piled up in a fire and burned. But during that episode, for about 6 months, when these farmers were losing their livestock, their rate of suicide went up to 10 times what it was prior to losing their beloved livestock. So we know that the sale of dairy cattle is hard. And enough said. Art, do you want to say anything about that?
I think for me, like I said, it's more the generational thing. I think that it was just making the decision, and that was the hardest part. Once the decision was made, for me personally, I think I'd done all the crying and everything already, you know.
Yeah.
And but that was all hard, no doubt about it.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And those are still raw feelings, and they're hard for all of us when we have to go through such trauma as you endured.
Many a morning I wake up and say, did I do the right thing? You know, afterwards, or still sometimes, did I do the right thing? You know, I feel I did, but you still wonder, you know.
Yeah. Well, let's remember that, you know, we're living in times that are abnormal. And for us to key up and get anxious and depressed is a normal response to abnormal times. And we're able, to some extent, to manage our behavior and to do something about it. And we're making some progress, and we're on the cusp of learning a whole lot more from people like you and from dedicated research. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Art and Dr. Rosmann, for the really good discussion this evening. We actually don't have any more questions, but I do really appreciate you taking the time to share your story, Art, and to Randy for sharing his story, and to you, Dr. Rosmann, for the really good insight. I hope that this discussion on managing stress and mental wellness in the dairy has been beneficial for those who joined us. For those who are looking for more resources, the center does have a stress and wellness section on our website. I am going to share my screen so you can see where those resources are located. So you'll find those resources at centerfordairyexcellence.org/program/resources/stress/wellness/resources. You can see the address for those resources in the top of the screen. The other thing that we wanted to mention, Dr. Rosmann had mentioned at the beginning of the chat, was that he had quite a few articles to go along with his presentation. If you go to the page that the live chat appears on, and if you just go to our homepage and click on live chat under upcoming events and scroll down near the bottom of that page, you'll find the resources that he mentioned. Like I said in the beginning of the call, our goal tonight was really to normalize the conversation around behavioral health in agriculture. I think, Art, you did a lot to help do that, as well as Dr. Rosmann. We really appreciate both of your time. This past year has been challenging for many, but dealing with the day-to-day stresses in farming brings its own unique challenges. I think the message we wanted to leave everyone with tonight is that it's okay not to be okay, and that there are people and resources out there to help you work through whatever challenge you are facing. The most important thing is that all of us in agriculture take care of ourselves, we look out for each other, and we know when it's time to ask for help. So we just really wanted to encourage more people to know that it's okay to ask for help and that there's resources available. So with that, I guess I would ask Mike or Art if you have any closing comments.
Just to say thank you to everybody.
I would say the same. Just thank you.
With that, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I hope you valued the conversation as much as I did. Hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.